Hey, everybody. Welcome to the WRST Podcast. And I am with my co conspirator, Petros, as well as our friend Phil from Airfoil Studio. So, Phil, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And, just to open it up, we'd love to hear from you a little bit about what is Airfoil Studio, how long have you all been in business, and, what are some like hot things on your plate?
For sure, for sure. Airfoil Studio is basically a creative company for the crypto industry. So we've product design firm, branding, 2D, 3D illustration, engineering firm that's worked with over 100 companies across our industry, ranging from working directly with L1s like Solana Labs and Labs, working with DeFi protocols like Friktion and Drift Protocol, DAO tooling companies like Layer 3 and Utopia Labs, and many, many more. And I initially started the company about 3.5 years ago. Um, we didn't actually start off initially in crypto, but about a year in, we started taking on more and more projects in crypto. And I think that for any product designer, the ability to work on things that you feel have real impacts is kind of what I think everybody really wants to do, right? It's what gives people a feeling of fulfillment, as if your work matters. And I sort of fell in love with the kind of mission and ethos of crypto and Web3, but identified that the user experience challenges that make it really difficult to get started. Getting a wallet, beginning to buy and use crypto. Not just like obtaining NFTs, but finding some value and utility in the stuff that you acquire. These are all things where if we can get the UX right, then we can create, the greatest movement for financial inclusion and for kind of democratization of ownership of your information, of your contributions to the web. If we don't get it right, then crypto will be relegated to something for enthusiasts. And so, given the stakes, right, we decided as a company to focus in on the crypto and Web3 space, and build kind of the first large scale creative firm for our industry. So right now we're a little over 80 people globally, across our product design, art and illustration, and engineering teams. And we're based between three cities, based in Toronto, Canada, which is where I am right now, based in Singapore, and based in Seoul, South Korea. So I float between kind of our various hubs, but about half the company works in office, about half the company works remotely, from over 16 countries all around the world, on all the stuff that we do. So I hope that's a good kind of opening explanation of what we do. But kind of the other, we that's the Airfoil Studio side. We also operate Airfoil Labs, which works on products that we build internally for the crypto industry, and also Airfoil Ventures, which does pre-seed and seed stage investment in companies that improve the usability of crypto and Web3. So that's kind of the lowdown on Airfoil.
Wow, that's wild. To be honest, I wasn't even wholly aware of what was going on with labs and with ventures. So that's really actually cool, and I think that is like a really good setup for the frame of the discussion I was kind of hoping to have with you today, which is understanding this difference between agency and agency development versus internal product development. And it sounds like you got a little bit of both going on, right? And for me, for what it's worth, I've not really spent a ton of time in agency. That's actually not my comfort zone. I've spent a lot more time in internal product development. And even though I've gone to design school, and a lot of my friends and classmates have gone and worked in agency, and my wife was at an agency just until the end of last year. She was actually interviewing for her current job while we were all in Lisbon together. And for context, that's where I met Phil for the very first time. Was when we were all in Lisbon. It was around that same time of Cosmoverse and Solana Breakpoint. Right. But anyways,
We actually met in such a cool way because it's we were bringing a few members of the team out to Lisbon, and we were looking for hotels, and the hotels are mostly booked up, so the prices had gone through the roof. And we looked at this one local hotel, and the price of every room type had gone up, but there was this one room that was supposed to be their best suite, and it was a giant, 3-bedroom suite. And because nobody had interest in renting it, it was actually not that expensive for 3 people. And so we're like, okay, we can get this thing. So we got it, and then I just posted on Twitter. I was like, does anybody want to come over and just kind of chill and co-work with us? And Alex reached out, and that's how we initially met. And then we just geeked out about design for like 2 hours or something like that.
Totally. And I had my son along with me, and he was hanging out in the couch, because that whole place, it looked and felt like a lot like an apartment inside of a hotel, where like they had this living room set up in the kitchen. So Phil and I were holed up in the kitchen and hacking away and grabbing a drink and whatnot. And then my son was out in the living room, like hanging out on an iPad and doing his own GM. But yeah, that was just an awesome way to meet, and through his serendipity of it all, yeah. Totally. But yeah, what I was trying to get a frame on here is like, why studio? That's like the question in my brain. Why studio? Because if you are a creator of any sort, like a business leader, right, and you're trying to get whatever it is you're doing off the ground, I'm trying to find and understand those arguments for why you would go with an agency versus why you would go with internal product development. And given your background, I feel like you would have like a lot of great context to give, especially on the agency side. And now that I've heard about labs, you could even talk maybe a little bit about internal product development.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was getting Airfoil started, I used to be over at a place called South Park Commons, just kind of an early stage incubator that was just kind of not necessarily Web3 focused. And so I would see a lot of founders, go from basically building, go make the first few hires on their team. And some things seemed kind of broken, because you'd have founders go in one of two directions. So either they would try really, really quickly to raise a lot and then be able to build out a large team internally. And they would do so, but they would often run into trouble, because it's not just about, do you have the capital to hire people for given roles? But generally speaking, everybody that you hire in the early days at a company that you're trying to build, you're not hiring them to do a job. You're hiring them to build something with you and become part of that thing. So if you hire an early stage product designer, I would expect that eventually that product designer is going to be a head of design, right? They're going to be leading other people. They're going to be with you for the long run. And if you look at some of the, greatest companies, like if I think about the early team that was at Meta, for example, they and let's put aside whatever you may think about the products that they necessarily built, but the more people you meet who are early at Meta or Dropbox, companies like that, the more you realize they're geniuses, right? They're these like 1 in a million talents that as a founder, you would feel 100% confident giving a considerable amount of equity to, right? But there's very few of these people, and it takes a long time to meet them. And so if you want to build kind of a championship team, you need the time and the space to actually put that team together. But founders are rushing that process, because they're like, oh shit, I have some product that needs to go out in 2 months. I need somebody today to go build this thing, and I need them to build it well. So I would witness a lot of founders, I think, make mistakes in their first few hires. And I can tell you one thing that I heard at the time, that I was told at the time, but didn't really realize until working even on this business, is that firing is the hardest thing you can do. So what I generally say to founders, I say, hey, I'm biased. I obviously run a business that is, a studio in this space. But you don't want to hire somebody you may need to fire later. You want to hire somebody that you'll never need to fire or never want to fire, because it's really, really hard to do that. And I would also see founders turn to agencies, but the traditional agency model has a lot of kind of core problems. I like to say that it's a lot like it's a lot like the airline industry. They practice overbooking. So typically, the way that agencies bill is they go and say, hey, here's a set of milestones that we're going to achieve. And typically the agency has an internal estimate of how long it takes to get that done, which of course factors into how much the labor is going to cost and then what they can charge. They provide that information to the client, but then the client often doesn't have a realistic expectation of when that can really get done. So what happens is the agency will take their actual estimate and they'll just add to it, right? They'll charge more, or they'll say, hey, this actually takes much longer. And then there's this back and forth negotiation. And I'm like, so that means, in other words, that as you're building your product, you don't feel like you can trust the people that you're working with. And that doesn't make sense either, right? Like I should be able to know whether somebody is internal with my company or whether they're external and I'm collaborating with them. I should be able to trust them. So either way, it seemed like early stage companies either were hiring the wrong people internally or they were turning to external resources, but those resources weren't going very well for them. And I mean, for founders that go through accelerators like SBC or YC, that are good and you know have a great reputation, there are a lot of like partners that they would turn to, large scale agencies, the types of agencies that would have done, you know, Google's rebrand or something like that. But those agencies also don't give their best people to early stage startups. It just we're being, you know, honest and straightforward about it, because those are not their cash cows. Why would they give the best people to projects they're paying them, you know, 20K or 30K when there are companies that will pay them 650 or 750 for a one-time job, right? Like you're going to prioritize the people that pay you more. So it felt like early stage founders didn't have a real partner, and that's why that's how we started. And we started because I was like, I feel that, you know, there is a type of designer or a type of engineer that likes to be able to spread their time out across different projects as opposed to working on one thing for years. That there is a business model problem in the way that agencies work that we can potentially solve. And that, you know, if I were to build just my own company tomorrow, I would turn to agencies in the early days. I would gradually hire the championship players that I want to assemble on my team. And then I would, you know, gradually shift that over time. If that would be the strategy that I would employ. And just as a cherry on top, when we saw, you know, how very few agencies had enough experience in crypto, where they were jumping into projects, but then there needed to be these very, very long onboarding times because you had to sort of explain to them everything about what you're building in order for them to be successful at it. And we're like, okay, there's definitely an opportunity here for us to build, you know, a company a company type that hadn't existed in our space before. And maybe to just explain an aspect of also our model and how we operate, since I know I mentioned that, you know, we don't do milestone-based billing. What we do at Airfoil is we basically say, either you contract us for 20, 40, or 60 hours a week. We have flat fee pricing, and the specific price depends on whether or not you engage us at a minimum of 3 months, a minimum of 6 months, and a minimum of 12 months. So that way it's really, really straightforward. We're not doing a ton of back and forth negotiation on price. We sort of set something that we think is fair and then say, like, you know, let's not worry about us negotiating timelines or about us negotiating price points. We've set something fair. If it isn't possible to make it work, we understand. Let's talk about what matters, which is how are we going to make you successful? And I think like cutting a lot of the BS out of that process at the beginning is one thing that we focused a lot of our time and attention on, because what we want to achieve is we want everybody who we work with to trust us, and we want to trust them as well. So I like to say that Airfoil is an extension of the team, that we feel like an extension of our clients' teams. But we mean that. I mean, we've flown people from our Singapore office out to San Francisco to do kind of on-sites with our clients. We've done a lot of like direct collaborative work. It's you know, there's a lot of folks that have been with us now for 1 or 2 years, and they trust us, you know, enough that there's not much of a line between their team internally and us, and that's something that's that's pretty rare in our space. So I think that the traditional agency model in many ways is very broken. I think it needed to change, but I also think that founders shouldn't try to grow a giant team quickly because it's difficult. Even if there's a lot of great people in your talent pool, culture fit matters, and finding the right kind of cohesive environment within your company. That's what's really difficult to build. Products are honestly easier to build than culture. And I mean, there's a lot I can say on that too, because we've certainly learned by trying things, and when they fail, learning from them, when they succeed, learning from them as well. But we've tried our best to also just build an environment that's rewards people for not just like churning out work quickly, but really investing time to learn and grow, so that they can be at the cutting edge of what they're working on.
That is just wild. So Phil, I was nodding all along here. I've been instructed because of prior podcasts to not do like and yeah and like and when I agree. But boy oh boy was I agreeing the whole way through that. I hear what you're saying about a championship team. The term of art that I've taken to use is step founders, because you typically have like the one or two or three kind of core founders who create that initial vision. And then what you're asking is, as these next wave of people come in, you're asking for them to adopt that vision a lot of times. But
I also think it's a fairness thing, because I would hear this all the time, right? Employee number one, employee number two, employee number three is a crappy job. And the reason is because you have your employee option pool, right? And the founders don't take their equity out of an employee option pool. They take their equity as co-founders, likely an even split. Then you have an employee equity pool. I would say if founders are being generous, that tends to be 20%, but it honestly is less than 20% most of the time. And so your employee number one is getting their equity out of the employee option pool. So out of the 20%, right, maybe they get one of those percent or two of those percent. Employee number two then gets half of that. Employee number three then gets half of that. But when you think about it, employee number one, two, and three, they're taking very even risk with founders. I mean, they at the end of the day, they're almost founders, but the amount of equity they actually get is dramatically less than. And so being employee number 10 is probably a better spot than being employee number one or number two, unless you happen to build Facebook or Apple or Google or something like that, in which case a small percentage matters a lot. That's why I think that it makes a lot of sense to go with agencies. And there are a few companies that we've worked with over the years that have had a really progressive attitude on this, and they've cut their own founder equity down and expanded the employee option pool, sometimes to upwards of 30%, and given early employees several percent, 4%, 5%. There's one company in particular that they gave their employee number one, I remember 7.5%. I was like, I've never heard of that before, but I love it, because you know what? If you want to keep somebody around for 10 years, and if you're building an amazing company, you're going to be building it 10 years from now, then you have to give them such significant equity that they believe that that it's worth continuing to co-build with you. And you know what? If you're going to give so much equity to somebody, you better be sure you would trust that person with your life, because realistically, you're trusting them with a big chunk of yours. So you got to make sure you're making the right call.
Oh man, that's absolutely wild. That is a total different framing of why agency than I think I've ever heard before. And so I really, I'm just so pleased as punch that we got you on this call, Phil. I got
Yeah. I wonder what other people would say about that, to be honest, because it's like, I mean, I feel like the points are, a lot of times what I hear is just like, oh, they've got a lot of experience, right? It's like, you can also find individuals who have a lot of experience too. There are some advantage to agencies there, but I'm like, it's you got to use the tools for what they're best at. And do I think that people should use agencies forever? No, that's kind of not what they're for. But should they just have an agency give them a branding package that makes them look nice and then immediately jump into hiring product design internally. I'm like, well, you want those things to jive together, right? So you probably want a broader offering than just one of those things. You want everything to kind of mesh well, and I think we needed to change the agency model to make that easier and more possible.
Totally. Now, certainly the kind of framing that I was kind of expecting to hear coming into this was along the lines of, if there's some aspect that is not like the core competency of the business, then and you don't want to hire internally for it, totally makes sense. You're like, the analogy I was giving Petros earlier today is like the idea of a car wash, right? If you have a car wash, you don't need to build an internal core competency on web dev, but you probably still need a website, just so you can have the Google presence and all that jazz and show up on Google Maps appropriately. And so there, I was like, oh, that's where an agency makes plain perfect sense. You don't need them to like, build a ton. You just need them to build a specific thing, and then, that's all the more use you have for them. And that like discrete use of agency made a ton of sense for me. But then the question for me was like, what about those scenarios when it is the core competency of a business? And I think there you were just really nailing it on the head about, oh, right. Yes, an agency can make sense in that context because you're trying to be very diligent about the permanent employees that you're trying to bring in. And this is an augmentation to your workforce that allows for you to have that flexibility and to have a ton of discretion on who are those folks that you're bringing in as your championship team. So, yeah, that just makes so much more sense the way that you framed it. Now, I'd like to change gears for a second and maybe talk about like what are the kind of like core pro reasons for internal development, right? Because I think what we see with agency is, you can have a lot of kind of focus shifting over time. Like you can, in a given week or month, like have to switch contexts very frequently. And so I'd be curious about some of your thoughts and maybe some of the learnings you've had as it relates to the labs and like where have you seen internal product development shine?
For sure. So I think that there are a few places where how would I describe it? Maybe I should describe kind of just like some really cool teams that I've seen, right? So it's like I got to meet the founders of Luma and by extension Glow Wallet recently, and I was really impressed with their company. They're a very lean company, right? They're a small team, but they're a close knit team. They all work in person together. They have strong camaraderie. And what's been cool about that for them is it means they iterate really fast and they can experiment really easily, right? So the way that I think about it is, you want maximum face time with people when you need to do lots and lots of collaborative work with them. I think the mistake that some founders make is they believe that all work is collaborative, right? So it's like all work ought to be done in person because it's easier to collaborate when you're sitting at the same table with somebody. Well, you know what? Sometimes you got to do heads down work, right? Sometimes you actually need to open VS Code and just sit in it for a few hours. Sometimes you need to open Figma and just play around with things individually. But given that, a lot of times you have to do a lot of active collaboration with people, and it can be do that when there's somebody for which it's not just that you're showing up to work with them, but you're going out to dinner with them, right? You're hanging out with them. You understand their thought process really well, and they're really focused on what they do. One of the reasons that we operate the way we do as an agency, we try to blend the way agencies work and the way that just working for companies works, and we try to limit, for example, our designers to taking on 2 projects at once and leading one project at one time, which is also different than a lot of agencies. But the reason we do that is because one of the coolest things about building internally is the fact that people are dedicating a large part of their mind space to one thing. And that's where a lot of great ideas can come from. Now, if we're talking about just like executing quickly or executing well on an idea that's already predefined, that's less relevant. But a lot of work in startups is coming up with new ideas that didn't exist before. And that only comes from somebody who's like, focused enough on the work they're doing that it's 11 p.m., they're laying in bed and they're just looking up at the ceiling and then being like, you know what, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? It's those moments. If you clock out and there's a risk to saying this because I also want to be really cautious about overwork and making your work your life, which we don't believe you should do. But at the same time, just being honest, as like just the founder, right? I think that the fact that my mind does not clock out at 6:30, right, is something that it affects our ability to come up with new ideas and do things differently. That can be really great when you're building kind of that close knit team together. So I think it's like you're not going to move as fast, but you have a lot more creative time and creative bandwidth, and that's a really cool thing to have. So I've seen some really small, lean companies build incredible products together because everybody just has this like synergy that's super, super tight. I think that can be really, really cool. And in our experience with Airfoil Labs, what's been cool as well is I would say the biggest thing is the tight connection and tight like relationship that everybody on the team has with each other. I think that's what's really cool, right? Is we have folks working for us in the EU that will go visit each other or attend hackathons and conferences together. We've organized offsites and meetups for our staff in Asia to come to Singapore and work out of the office together and hang out. One of the reasons we've done that is just because communication is difficult, and communication requires people to understand where other people are coming from. And I can tell you that if Min, my co-founder, walks in the room right now, and I can like from just like the expression on her face, I can tell if there's something I need to follow up with her about, right? Because we work together so often and we have that close relationship. And I think that the biggest place where building a team internally gives you an advantage is have such a tight and close relationship with those people that you can do that. And so we try to mix it, right? But it's like, but that's I think the biggest thing that I like about the internal doing like kind of internal product development.
Right on. So if you're comfortable talking about some of the stuff you're working on labs, I'd love to dig in on that for a half second. If it's still like in the kind of like the secret labs, I totally respect that. And we can when you're ready to bring it to light, then we'll totally have a follow-up call and talk through it. But yeah.
Not so much that I can say right now, but what I would generally say is this. We are working on tools that we think will help Web2 businesses jump into Web3. Some of those things are really basic. Some of those things are, how do I get paid? How do I make sure that I am compliant with the law? How do I make it easy for people to understand how to actually use my token or redeem my token for something? How can we help people monetize what they have, what they know? There's a lot of like interesting things there that we're working on, and also just like basic onboarding tools for crypto. A group of designers and engineers on our team just released something called Bloombox, which actually started out of they attended Solana Breakpoint the Solana Hacker House in Barcelona, and they were trying to answer the question, how can we better onboard people to Solana and to DeFi in general? And so they came with a really brilliant idea, which I'm happy to link to it, and also would love to credit the designers that worked on it. But basically, the idea was that a lot of onboarding into crypto basically is us as crypto natives going to people who aren't crypto natives and saying, do the work, then you can get a reward, right? Go learn about this, go investigate this, and then you can get a reward. And what we have to do onboard more people to crypto is we have to flip that. Reward first, then people will do the work. So here's what I mean by that. If I want to onboard somebody to Solana, I have to tell them, I have to say, hey, go download Glow, or go download Phantom. And then I'll go send you some Sol. And then you should go explore different protocols. And then you should connect your wallet. And then you can start using it, right? So I'm saying to people, do the work, then I'll reward you, right? Most people will not say yes to that, right? We think about the adoption curve. That's purely something that early adopters will do. It's not something that early majority or later will do. And so a group of folks here came up with a really brilliant idea, which was, okay, it's really easy to create new wallets, right? So why don't we create this thing called Bloombox, where we can generate a really beautiful box, and it's a bloombox.app, and it like spins and shines and everything, and you can transfer some Sol into that box. Then you send somebody a link to the box, they open it, it presents them with this present, and then they can choose to either transfer that to their wallet, and there's explanations of how to do that, or they can just begin using the wallet immediately. And that means, in other words, it's pretty much the same thing, right? As just telling somebody, hey, go download Phantom, and then I'll transfer you some Sol. But it's positioned to the user as giving the user a gift first, and then they can go and explore further. It's little things like that that we have to do in order to, I think, like, make the transition from crypto as something for enthusiasts and crypto as something for all. And Bloombox is one thing that was incubated here that's now gone live. There's a lot more things like it to come, but it's all kind of based on that same idea of this is how we're going to bridge that chasm from enthusiast to inclusive for everyone.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think that we've encountered a really similar thought process, and the way that I think Petros and I could point to would be with the cards. Do you know what I'm talking about, Petros?
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk about that process and how that works? Because it's exactly the same idea of like, you don't like it's reward first, then work, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great example. So in general, it's a situation where you go into a physical location, or whether it's online, you get a product or you're gifted a product for being there. And with the purchase of a product or with attending something, you're also given this card, and this card has the ability for you to go and redeem an NFT and get it for free. And so it's a very simple interface. It's something that folks are used to, like, hey, scan this code or whatever simple thing and go here, and then you're going to be given this wonderful new gift that's a value add on top of what you already did or what you already got. So that's kind of what we've seen, and it is pretty effective. There's a lot of folks in the NFT space kind of trying that out for brands.
Yeah, that's kind of it's like a phygital redemption model, right?
Redemption model,
where there's like a scratch off card, and the scratch off card would what it does is it gives you like the 12 key mnemonic, right, to like recover the wallet proper, and it comes preloaded with the NFT and with like just enough to cover like a transfer gas cost, so that you can get it out to like your more secure wallet, like your Ledger or whatever. But different attack on the space. But I think that's another one of those cases where you're right. Like folks in the Web 2 world, it would be way better for them to like receive a thing first, and then worry about like the whole rest of, and then set up your wallet and whatever if you want to like move to higher security contexts, right? So yeah, I totally love the way that this is going. That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I'll say, like, if you have like their Twitter handles or whatnot, super happy to add them to the show notes so that folks can link up with them afterwards.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think I'm right there with you when it comes to internal product development. And that ability to, have the mental space available for innovation to occur, right? That it does require, thinking about like Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow, right? That you do need the slow part to occur, that kind of like methodical thinking or the mental space to explore alternative opportunities and to let your subconscious do a little bit of the work and like help express alternatives, versus if you're like in the rush of it, right, and trying to like do quick turns. I'd love to maybe now, and we've been talking about the positives. I'm kind of curious if we could look at maybe some of the downsides, or like what are some of the challenges that have come across looking at the experience of agency work. So, one of the things that I'm thinking about is this concept of maintenance. It drove me absolutely nuts when I was first getting introduced to design as an idea. When I first moved down to Austin, I went to this thing called Design Extravaganza, and there was a whole bunch of like big heads in design that showed up. It was like Alan Cooper and all these other folks that you're just like, what are you even doing in Austin, Texas? But the thing that was bothering me is like all of these folks were talking about innovation and new thoughts and new ideas and expanding boundaries and all this, but nobody was talking about maintenance, and that felt weird to me, because I'm like, how can you create without a thought towards sustainability, without a thought toward, the longevity of a project? It was all of this focus on the front edge and the exploration, but nothing about the how do we make it last, or how do we make it so that how can we be intentional about having folks come in and keep a system alive. And so I'm curious about if you've run into a similar thing as you've gone through, your time with agency.
Yeah. I think you immediately pointed out kind of one really big thing here, which is that it is difficult to convince teams, and I totally get why, because the deadline for everything in early stage startups is yesterday, and you want to get the product out as soon as possible. But convincing people that it's important to invest, for example, in creating a great design system that can be used going forward. For those who don't know what that term means, it basically means instead of designing your interfaces by creating a set of discrete screens, create components first, right? Create the buttons, create the input fields, create page layouts, etc. Right? Matters a lot to do that, because it makes it easier to navigate the handoff to engineering. It means that you won't have to unify a lot of your work later on, that your work will be easier to build from the ground up. It also makes it much easier for other designers to pick up where you've left off or use what you do. We take design systems really seriously. It's a big part of what we do. But then, when we're working with a client and they're like, hey, we want to get X, Y, and Z done, and we're just like, hey, this is what's doable by the time that you want to go live. And the first thing that we often hear is like, okay, but why do we need to do this design system work? Right. And it's difficult to, I think, explain to people. It's like, I know that right now you want us to not focus on this, but in 6 months, you're going to wish we did. If we try to skip this step now and do something that's a little bit more like happy. At the same time, I think that, it's about finding the right balance too, because there are a lot of things that happen within larger design works at larger companies that don't need to happen within startups. Like, it's okay to be a little more scrappy, right? It's okay to sometimes have to close the gap, in explaining your designs, explaining what you've worked on with an engineer over a Zoom call, rather than writing out, tons of explanations within Figma. It's okay if all of your layers aren't named, right? There's certain stuff that's expected when you're at large organizations that's okay when you're at smaller ones. I think even for us, when we hire, one challenge is explaining to people either who've worked at tiny little companies that it's okay to not be as scrappy as you were, because you have more bandwidth, you have more people to support you at Airfoil, but also telling people who come from larger companies and organizations that, like, when they start a project, they're not going to start a project with a design system done for them out of the box. If you join YouTube and you start designing at YouTube, YouTube hands you a design system that has been created by entire teams at the company over months and years, right? If you are starting at a startup, you have nothing. There's nothing that was there before. And it's tricky. And most people, most designers don't know how to do that because they haven't been in that environment before to set the right amount of structure without overdoing it or underdoing it. And so that's definitely like a really, really big challenge. I think that would also lead me to like another maybe negative, I would say, of like working on an agency like this, which is that frankly, if you're working at a particular company, one company, you can spend a lot of time vetting that company really, really well. You can do a week or 2 weeks to work with them on a trial period. You can basically suss out a few things. You can suss out if they have unrealistic expectations. You can suss out their communication style and make sure that it aligns with you really, really closely. All of that. When you're working in an agency environment or working with a lot of different clients or managing a lot of different clients, it's much harder to screen for that. And we've definitely had a few experiences with clients where we've had to fire them because their expectations are just like, why is this taking so long? And I'm like, it's not taking long. We started it on Monday. It's Wednesday now. We've had 2 days to work on this feature. Yeah, but just do it faster. It's like, that's not possible, And just adding more hours doesn't necessarily make something faster. It can often make something longer. We've had clients where like, all of a sudden funding falls through for them, and then all of a sudden it's like a Jekyll and Hyde situation where they were really, really nice, and now that there's a lot of financial pressure, they're not very nice anymore. That's really tricky and difficult. Also, we have to suss out how much people know about design going in. We love taking on clients where, it doesn't mean that the founders have to be designers, but they have to understand the way that kind of design processes work and maybe have a product background or something where we know that they know what they don't know, right? And I think that's a really key point. I started off as a front end engineer, but it's not my focus. But I know enough about the processes around engineering. I was formerly a product manager, where when I'm having a conversation with Gabriel, our head of engineering, we can roughly speak the same language, right? That's important. If I didn't know anything about engineering, then I either would, I think people who don't know anything about either engineering or design or something and are just firing for that, right? They either they have to be very trusting, and they have to sort of say just like, we trust you guys to handle it, or they tend to be very overzealous with micromanaging the project because they don't understand why something might cause additional complexity. When I started working as a freelancer a long time ago, I cannot tell you how many times I would work with a client and they'd be like, great, you did the web designs. Okay, can you make an iPhone app for this? And I'm like, cool, I can. They're like, so how many days will that take you? And I'm like, what do you mean how many days will that take me? That's not going to take me days. That's going to take me weeks. I mean, we're trying to, design something for a totally different platform. Well, why? Why can't you just resize everything? Well, it's because we got to make sure that it's usable on mobile. We have to make sure we're not overcomplicating the interface. We don't have too many touch areas. We adhere to the Apple HIG and Android's human interface guidelines. Like, there's all this complexity here, and if you don't know all of those things, then you might say, oh well, these guys they're probably trying to just like delay the timeline, make more money. It's like, no, these are difficult, and there's additional complexity. So we try to suss out when we're talking with clients very early on, are they the types of people that are going to ask us questions because they want to hear our answers, right? And they want to discuss things with us, and we know some things they don't know, they know some things we don't know, right? And sort of operate with a mutual respect. The types of founders that are just going to be like hard drivers, and we try to avoid those people, but at the same time, you don't always know everyone you're going to work with when you sign the deal, and that's quite tricky.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking I might throw the mic over to Petros for a little bit. He's been sitting quietly on the couch here, but you have all of this history, and I'm thinking as we've been talking about agency, as we've been talking about internal product design, and especially about startups, I'd imagine a lot of this has been resonating with you. I'm kind of wondering, like, what's your take? Because and first, like, for context, Petros, it'd probably be good for you to share what were you doing before you joined WRST Collabs.
Sure. And before doing that, I do want to mention that everything that you were talking about, I was like, yes, I remember. Yes, I've gone through that. It was in line with a lot of these sort of things I was thinking through as I wanted to join this call. So we did cover a lot of them, which is wonderful. But prior to joining here, I did two major things. One was I also did an agency startup, more of a specialized agency, if you will, called Knox Labs. And at the time, we were focused on virtual reality experiences for large brands. So that involved creating either apps, videos, or websites in VR, and having custom branded, cardboard headsets to accompany them and do large activations. And then after that, I founded a small company that I run a product that I invented, and I grew that. So I was both on the receiving end and on the service providing end of agencies, and I've kind of experienced both worlds. But a lot of these things that you're talking about are exactly in line with what I see is agencies are a lot of the times either a specific, hey, I need this obscure thing like VR. No one's going to build a VR team internally. Like, you need to be the expert to do this, right? So that's a very great use case. Or it's something where, hey, I need you to get me up to speed so that I can, take the time to play in the space, grow in the space, but then mature enough as a company to be able to take over and be my own sort of in-house expert here. And I think those resonated perfectly. Those are the perfect things for agency. One of the things for I guess on the con side, I'm curious how you handle this is oftentimes I think you brought up, like, you're in the system one thinking, the quick go. It can be very disorienting. It can be hard to get your footing and plan through things and think through things on a deeper level. How are some of the ways, have you guys experienced that, and how are some of the ways that you guys have addressed that to still continue delivering solid output for your clients? I'm curious to know, because that's one of the biggest challenges that I think agency life provides.
Yeah, just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question correctly. I'm kind of understanding it to be more around, like, how do you, if you are juggling multiple projects, get enough context on the projects and what's being built to be successful at it, or kind of
that, and also resource planning and how you effectively can execute on not just finding out the information, but also being able to deliver on it from start to finish in a manner that's more deep rather than superficial. Like, hey, here's a general concept, let me execute fast. But instead of executing fast, executing well in that constraint of time.
That's a great question. So, I mean, before I say that it's not too hard to do resourcing, I know that Min is in the other room and she's going to be like, really, Phil, it's So she does our design resourcing, so that's why. I mean, it is a little easier for us than most because of the way that we kind of chunk our time and structure being different than most agencies. So that does make it easier for us because we won't have somebody who's on a project like, just a couple hours one week and then they go jump off to another thing, or we really dissuade that from happening. But it is still difficult because we may still need to shift someone mid-project, right? So a project may involve product design for one piece, but then branding for another piece. And so we built a lot of systems to manage all of that, but it still is quite tricky to do. But what we are aiming for at the end of the day is we want everybody at Airfoil to be involved in 2 projects max, be involved in leading 1 project max. And it's because the less context switching the team has to do, then the better quality their work is. So we take that really seriously. We also do invest heavily in preparation before projects to give people prior context, give them access to white papers. We have some bandwidth internally to write up little briefs that also brief the designers on what it is that they're going to be working on, what the background is, what are competitive products. They can start using them before the project even starts. The basic idea is like we want to make sure that in the kickoff call at the very beginning, the designers are asking highly specific questions as opposed to general broad questions, right? So this is both so that our team can be successful and so frankly clients can be impressed, because a client starts with us, and if we've done enough prep work beforehand, and I've hopped on a call or Mint's hopped on a call with the designer, we've like talked through the challenges we've heard from them across like the sales process. We do the kickoff call, and the client's like, okay, so I'm working on a DeFi protocol. Maybe I can take a few minutes to explain what it is that I'm doing, and then we can dive into timeline. And the designer's like, oh, I know what you're doing. Actually, you're doing X, Y, and Z. How from direct competitor A? And then the client's like, oh, great. Okay, we're talking the same language. We can dive in. But we'll try every product that's competitive. We'll dive into the products we're working on before we work on them. We'll be taking careful notes and documentation. It's all about immersion. I mean, even before we were a crypto and Web3 focused company, in the early days, I remember we worked on one project that I thought was really interesting. Basically, there was this company that had identified that the systems that are used for like industrial control systems, the energy industry, etc., they're called PLCs, programmable logic controllers. The software for it was the software that you use to program is really, really bad. And so they wanted to build the Figma for that industry. It was an ex Uber VP of engineering was working on it. I was directly working on it. And the first thing that he said to do is he's like, but the only thing is, in order to do this project, you're going to need to take this course and learn how to actually program these PLCs, because how can you redesign it if you don't know how to use what's already there, right? That has carried through to today with Airfoil. We expect that everybody who's working on a project actually start using the thing they're working on and start using everything competitive, right? If they are reinventing something, they ought to have already used the stuff that came before it. If they're designing a new type of wallet, they must have downloaded 15 wallets already on their phone. They must have tried all of them, and they must have already written up documentation on what makes different approaches stand out as positives or negatives between them, right? So that's what we do, and we put a lot of time in. And what we do in designers off time between projects is we just say, keep exploring, take notes, share out with the team, because there's always new stuff happening in our space, and it is difficult even for me and this is my job, and it's difficult for me to even stay on top of everything. So we do share outs, believe it's twice a week at the company, where people show what they're working on, show what they've discovered recently, discuss it with the team, and spend time learning together.
That is so incredible. I think those are such amazing points. And I thought of another question that I had. It popped up while you were discussing that, because your answer kind of answers this next question, but I wanted to take it from the opposite direction, kind of devil's advocate, if you will, because I experienced this pain point. So it's a bit of a selfish question. When I, at the time, knew very little as a brand trying to hire an agency and evaluate whether or not the agency can actually execute on what they're promising. And so I, get a lot of the, we can do this, a pie in the sky promises of what they can execute as an agency for a brand. But I learned that they always fell short of what they promised. So how would you advise a brand looking to work with an agency to best evaluate whether that agency can actually deliver what they want, if that question makes sense? How would you help a brand evaluate an agency, maybe an agency such as yourself, to ensure that they're working with the correct agency, the best agency they could work with?
Yeah, I think that references matter, and there's been a lot of times where people have talked to us and they're just like, hey, we're deciding between you guys and a few others, and what we'll generally say is we'll just say, hey, you probably know somebody that's worked with us in the past. We'll help you figure out who that is, and then reach out to them on, without us even being involved, and ask them, what their experience was like, what they enjoyed about it. I think that's the best way to get an honest answer. The other thing is agencies have lots of different people within them. And so, even in that case, if you were to reach out to a previous client, that's not necessarily the person at Airfoil that you would work with, right? So what we've done is for all of our contracts, we have a 1 month trial period that's built in. We say at the end of the first month, you can walk away, no questions asked, no fees, nothing, so that you can feel confident that we're doing everything we can. And frankly, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but it's like, in the early days, like there were a few projects that I didn't feel we nailed because maybe I hired the wrong person, or maybe like we didn't prepare them well enough or something like that. I feel like those are more early issues, but I remember there was one project where we did hire somebody that we ended up letting go because they did not do all the work that they said they were going to do, and keeping this answer kind of vague. And we just flat out just refunded the client immediately. We said, hey, we're going to continue 1 more month to make sure that this gets done well. And I'm going to change these on the project. And then you can come back to us and tell us if you think the work is good. If you think that we're hitting, what we discussed. Until you come and tell us that this problem has been fully resolved, then you're not going to pay us, because we want to make sure we do it right. I think that the crypto and Web3 community is very small. Reputations matter a lot, and so we would much rather part ways amicably, or do whatever we can do to make something right, than just be like firm on those things.
It's incredible.
I want to make sure I answer directly though the question of like, just like how do you vet an agency? And I'm not sure I have a better answer than just talk to people that work with them, talk about like what their experience has been like. And I think maybe the most important thing is like try to evaluate the integrity of the people that you work with. Because for us, like in some of those cases early on where like we were still learning how to run this business and maybe made some mistakes, to us, we believe that if work output isn't exactly what we have promised, we believe it's wrong to charge or use that as leverage, or act in any way that's kind of shady. And so that's just like, we want to do the right thing. Profitability be damned, right? Do the right thing. And it's important to us. And so what I tell people when they're talking with references, I say like, ask them about that, right? Ask them if they feel that we have fully lived up to those expectations for our values and our integrity. And, I guess what I would say is that's the question that should be asked of any agency, any external partner. Even if, I have many founder friends who are like, I like hiring, the mercenaries over the missionaries. We have built a company that is proudly the missionaries over the mercenaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those are actually the people that you should work with, because somebody who is a great hired gun and effective at what they do, but could still screw you over, either by jumping to a direct competitor when they're already working with you, or by realizing that you haven't paid attention to the project as much because you trust them, and then they kind of pull their hands off of it. Those are all incredibly costly things. So if you get that gut feeling when you're talking to an agency, like I don't feel like they're playing it straight, right? Then I would say run. The same way that if you were evaluating a full-time hire for your team and you had that feeling, I would also say, right, run. Don't go forward with it because it doesn't make sense.
I couldn't possibly agree more.
Same. Beautiful answer. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to not just like pitch us, because it's like, these are values that I do care really deeply about, right? And in setting up the company, we've tried our best to create a company that follows those values. So I worry that some of the answers are maybe sounding just like, I'm like, oh yeah, you should do this, and by the way, we're trying to do this, but we're trying our best to make sure we adhere to those values. But obviously, there's a lot of other folks and players in the space that do as well. And I would just generally say, look for people with integrity. Talk to the people that have worked with them in the past, and hear about how they have dealt with difficult situations. Have they done so with integrity and honesty? Have they done so with care and empathy? And of course, look at their results and the work output and see, does it make sense for you? And trust your gut. If you get a bad gut feeling about somebody, then it's okay to wait. It's okay to wait for the right fit. This is kind of a common topic with what I was saying earlier too about full-time hires, right? Don't hire somebody full-time just because you have a problem that needs to be solved. Hire somebody full-time because you believe that they're the best person to do that thing. Whether it's about hiring an agency, or it's about hiring a full-time employee, or it's about taking on an investor, right? Doesn't really matter who it is or what it is. Be willing to play the long game and wait for the right fit that you trust, rather than going for what's convenient in the short term.
Very well said. Thank
100%.
you.
Phil, this hour has like flown by, and it's just wild to me like how quickly the time flew. But I did want to give a beat. Was there anything that you would like to bring up or talk about? Just the mic is yours. So I'm just thinking almost like the Hot Wings show, like this camera. So
The Hot
tell
Ones?
the people what. Yeah, Hot
I
Ones.
love that show.
But no, seriously, was there any kind of like closing thoughts you had, or anything special you'd like to share with folks?
Oh boy, I'm just thinking like what I want to say from here on out. Okay, I'll start with like a quick pitch as well. We're always hiring for product design. We're always hiring for engineering, for illustration. So if you're out there and you watch this and you're looking into a company that's trying to make Web3 easier to use, let us know. And of course, we're taking on new clients right now. So please do reach out if you'd like to work with us, and if we can work together to build something awesome. But maybe the last thing that I want to maybe emphasize is one part of why we built the company, that I feel like we don't talk enough about in kind of business and startups, which is kind of the importance of company culture. I've worked in a lot of fast-growing startup environments, and I can tell you that I've worked in some good places. I've worked in some pretty toxic places. When we started Airfoil, we wanted to create a company that we were proud of, from the perspective of we wanted to treat everybody on our team with respect, and build a place to work that people would be really excited to work in. I think in general, right, like as you scale a company, if you see everybody within your organization as cogs in the machine, and you neglect their individuality as people, then you miss out on what makes them great. Maybe earlier in the hour I mentioned how people who you when you're working at something early stage, you have to kind of not turn your brain off at 6:30 and continue to think about new ideas. But it's giving people the freedom and the latitude to think about new ideas that leads to the best ideas, right? And creates a great organization. Small startups have very limited resources, and at the end of the day, if we're looking at the small boat in the sea and the big steamship, right? The small boat can change direction really, really easily. The steamship can't do that, but it can go really, really fast. Your job as a founder is to build the right crew, to pay attention to the waters, and to sail in the right direction. And if you pick a direction that's different than the direction the steamship is going in, but is actually the best path, you will outrace the steamship. If you pick the same one the steamship is on, you will never outrace the steamship. Trying to just build I mean, it's kind of a labored analogy, but it's like, so your job is to make sure that you are very right about the direction. And if you do not empower your employees and your coworkers to make creative decisions, to inform your decision making, to tell you as a boss or as a leader that you're wrong sometimes when you are wrong, if you're not listening to the feedback they give and you pick the wrong direction, then you're going to lose. But if you can pick the right direction because you have the combination of the creative forces that you've put together as a team and as a company, then that's when you can win. I know the analogy is kind of labored, but it's more like I kind of want to make the case for why empowering creativity within your organization is the best way to build a company, and why, like, building companies where you just like set crazy deadlines, micromanage people, kind of create this craziness at work. It doesn't yield a better return on investment. It doesn't, build a more sustainable or more successful company. I don't think the culture works. But so it's not just like, it's, in addition to treating your people well because it's the right thing to do it because it's the right way to build a company. And we try our best to do so, and I love our team and I love our teammates. I want us to, in 10 years time, be able to look back at this business and say that, that we've, it sounds really obnoxious and all of that, but it's like, I want us to be able to say that we've built a successful and impactful company while keeping, because of those aspects of our culture, not despite those aspects of our culture.
100%. Phil, this was so awesome. Thank you so very much for being on the podcast. I hope you're going to let us bug you later and have you come in later in the year or into 2023. And for sure, next time you're in Austin, Texas, please come on in.
Anytime, man. Anytime. I mean, it's going to get real cold in the city pretty soon, so I might join you down there.
Come on down.
Totally. It'll be like t-shirt and jeans weather down here. Yeah, totally.
Nice. Have a great day, guys.
Have a great one.
Thank you, Phil.